Move on now and talk about Ukraine. It's a subject that comes and goes on the news agenda. We haven't spoken about it a great deal. It seemed to me that actually, obviously, Christmas is approaching, what it's like for those poor people caught in this terrible conflict in Ukraine. And then yesterday, Russian President Vladimir Putin was pictured arriving in Minsk yesterday ahead of his meeting with his Belarusian counterpart, Alexander Lukashenko. Mr. Putin was seen walking on a red carpet. It's the first president's visit to Minsk in 3.5 years, and there is real concern that he is trying to pressurise his Belarusian counterpart to join a new offensive against Ukraine. It's a weighty delegation that has gone there. It's his second trip to Minsk this month. He signed some sort of defence pact, it seems, with the Belarusian defence minister, and Ukraine is increasingly concerned about what is happening and tightening its borders. Let's talk to Cormac Smith now, former communication advisor to the foreign minister of Ukraine. Good morning to you.
David, good morning to you. How are you, sir?
Very good to see you, Cormac. Always a pleasure to talk to you. What's the situation on the ground now in Ukraine? I just feel so guilty in many ways that it's a subject we talk about, we concentrate on, and then we leave it for many, many days. And of course, that is something that people in Ukraine simply can't do. This is everyday reality.
And it's a great frustration to me and my Ukrainian friends, and it's what we call Ukraine fatigue. Look, recently the Foreign Minister of Ukraine, Alexei Reznikov, and the Chief of the General Staff, Zaluzny, have both expressed fears that Russia may be planning a major new offensive very early in the new year, even to have a go at Kyiv as well. It was reported recently that by one of the NATO allies that Putin will be quite happy to see another 300,000 of his own troops die. Now, they are taking massive losses. According to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, they're coming up on 100,000 dead already, and multiply that by 2 to 3. But David, I have been saying since January, when I started doing these interviews, I have been warning that this thug has no compunction with murdering tens of thousands of innocent civilians. He did it in Syria, he did it in Chechnya, and we've seen him do it in Mariupol in particular. He also has no compunction with feeding tens of thousands of his own people into the meat grinder. So it is serious. We are doing a huge amount to support Ukraine. I've got to say, we need to do more. There are certain strategic systems and weapons the Ukrainians have been crying out for since the start of this war. We really must get a hurry on and give them the jets, the tanks, and the longer range artillery.
I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that, because the Prime Minister obviously met with Europeans, frontier leaders, to try and strengthen efforts to support Russian aggression. You talk about Ukraine fatigue, and I think many European countries also feel the same. The UK has announced it's going to supply hundreds of thousands of rounds of artillery ammunition next year. There's a £250 million contract to ensure a constant flow of artillery ammunition throughout 2023. But the thing is, what you need is European resolve, and I just wonder whether that resolve is there from across the European nations and from the European leaders. They are also tired, they're also wary of what it does to them politically back home.
Well, look, David, the greatest resolve we have is where the Prime Minister was yesterday in Riga with the Baltic states and Poland and the other Eastern European countries. You know, they have been absolutely solid because they, like the people I made friends with when I was out there, they grew up with the horrors of a Russian empire, and they understand it. We have a lot more work to do to get the likes of the Germans and the French, the Germans in particular. A very good friend of mine, Ukraine's ambassador to Berlin, it was announced recently he has just begun negotiating with the German government for the supply of Germany's main battle tank, the Leopard 2, and also Martin armored personnel carriers. You know, I was out in Berlin a few weeks ago and I spoke to Alexei. These will make a huge difference on the ground to Ukraine, as will the longer range artillery that we are still, you know, the artillery we give them now has a maximum range of 80 kilometers. Yeah. The Ukrainians need what they're called ATACMS. These have a range of 300 kilometers. And we've got to get off their back and let them strike at Russian military targets inside Russia because it is these air bases and the Black Sea Fleet and so forth that are being used to launch these murderous, genocidal attacks on Ukrainian civilians. Think about it, David. Imagine if during the Second World War we said, oh, we can't attack Germany, we can't attack German cities or German industry or so forth. I mean, we are still, as much as we are doing, and I am very, very proud because I once played a very small part of it. Britain is, despite what people have said, Britain is still at the forefront of this. And I think Prime Minister Sunak was absolutely solid in Riga yesterday. And, you know, he was speaking to the right people. And of course, there's an expeditionary force out there made up of the Baltics and ourselves, which the Brits lead. But we've got to do more.
I mean, isn't the problem actually that Putin has a deity-like complex? His ego's taken a massive bashing given the Ukrainian advances retaking territory. My concern is that actually Putin's legacy is one of failure at the moment, and he will do anything he can to change that. Would you agree with that?
David, I'd agree absolutely. This is an existential threat for Ukraine because Putin has made it very clear that Ukraine has no right to exist. And we have all the evidence by the legal definitions of every one of the 5 tests of genocide. What Russia has been doing in Ukraine for 10 months now is genocide in a European country. But equally, this is an existential threat for Putin. You know, most of us have now got beyond all the garbage of NATO expansion and hunting down Nazis in Ukraine and the Russian-speaking minority being victimized. That was all ridiculous. The thing that Putin, and I've been saying, well, for as long as anybody would listen, the thing that Putin fears most is democracy. And he fears democracy in a former Soviet republic on his doorstep, because that is going to be poison for the nascent democratic and freedom movement at home. So, you know, Putin cannot afford to let Ukraine survive. So this is an existential threat for both sides, and you know we need to recognize that in the West. Because the other thing that I always say, yes, we have a moral obligation to support Ukraine because genocide is being carried out, but don't forget, Russia has been waging a hybrid war against all of us for at least 9 years since the annexation of Crimea, arguably longer. They have been waging a war on our rules-based order, as imperfect as it may be, for the last 75 years, has given us the greatest period of peace and security the world has ever known, based mainly between ourselves and North America, but including other countries as well. And Russia hates this. And what Russia is doing at the moment is attacking that. Lavrov in 2017 spoke of the post-West era and the disintegration of our rules-based order. And recently, Putin and Lebedev have said very, very similar things about how much they hate and do not recognize our rules-based order. I would put it to listeners, if it's rules-based order or the post-West era of Lavrov and Putin's fantasies, which would be, you know, Russia would be a major power broker. China will come in if and when they see it in their interest. At the moment, they're sitting back. But God help us if China come in, because their power dwarfs Russia. We already know that Syria and North Korea and Iran are in Putin's pocket. So that's what I want people to grasp. This really is, even if, like me, you're not passionate and care about the Ukrainian people, although I think certainly most Brits do. You know, Britain has been fantastic at every level. But this wolf will come to our door, David. It really will.
Cormac, thank you very much indeed. Great pleasure to talk to you. That's Cormac Smith, who's former communication advisor to the Foreign Minister of Ukraine. This is